In the heart of Florida, hidden behind layers of razor wire and a reputation whispered across the federal system, lies a prison so feared that even the most hardened inmates call it the end of the line. Today we step inside USP Coleman I, America's so-called Florida Stronghold, a place where alliances are fragile, history bleeds into every corridor, and survival depends on far more than strength. Before we enter this world, hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear is the truth they don't want told. Welcome back to the channel. If you love deep-dive prison documentaries built on verified facts, not fiction, make sure to subscribe, turn on notification bells, and hit like so this video reaches more people who want the truth about America's most notorious federal strongholds. Your support lets us continue uncovering the stories locked away behind concrete, steel, and silence. Today we open the gates to USP Coleman I, the highest security section of the massive Coleman Federal Correctional Complex in Sumter County, Florida. Known among inmates and staff as one of the Bureau of Prisons' cleanest, strictest, yet most dangerous compounds, it's a place with a long, complicated history. From gang wars to notorious inmates, from the myths about gladiator programs to the real power structures inside. We're going deeper than any public documentary ever dares. This is inside Coleman's maximum security world, USP Coleman I, the Florida Stronghold. Let's begin. USP Coleman I did not appear in the Florida landscape by accident, it was engineered into existence. Built as part of the Coleman Federal Correctional Complex, the largest federal prison compound in the United States, USP Coleman I opened its doors in 1995 with a singular objective: create a high-security facility capable of housing individuals deemed too dangerous, too organized, or too unpredictable for standard penitentiaries. Located in Sumter County, far from major cities, the area was chosen for a reason. The Bureau of Prisons wanted isolation, distance from heavy population centers, distance from major highways, distance from the kind of urban environments where escape or external assistance becomes easier. The compound spans thousands of acres, a self-contained universe of concrete and electrified barriers surrounded by quiet Florida woods. To outsiders, it appears almost peaceful. To anyone inside the razor wire, it is anything but. Coleman I was designed to be a fortress. Massive housing units, reinforced walls, strategic watchtower placement, and the kind of perimeter security normally reserved for military installations. With multiple layers of fencing, ground sensors, patrol roads, and armed tower officers, USP Coleman I quickly earned a reputation. If you were sent here, you were meant to stay here. In its early years, Coleman was heralded as a model federal institution, part of a new wave of super-secure prisons intended to reduce violence and limit inmate-to-staff contact. But even the strictest blueprints can't control human chemistry. Coleman's population, shaped heavily by gang politics, strict racial group structures, and power built on reputation, brought in tensions from prisons across the nation. The Bureau of Prisons filled Coleman I with a wide mix of offenders: high-level gang members, notorious organized crime figures, inmates convicted of violent acts inside other prisons, and individuals needing separation due to their notoriety or security classification. As more transfers arrived, the internal ecosystem evolved. Power shifted. Alliances formed in the yard and dissolved in the corridors. Old beefs resurfaced. And the prison began developing its own mythology. Across the federal system, inmates spoke about Coleman with a mix of fear, respect, and curiosity. It wasn't known for being chaotic in the same way as USP Lewisburg or USP Atlanta. It wasn't notorious for the extreme political structures of USP Florence. Instead, Coleman earned a reputation for something different. Behind its clean, well-kept appearance, it was a place where serious men handled serious business, and where missteps could be fatal. Former inmates have described Coleman I as deceptively calm. The violence is not always loud, not always daily, not always visible to the untrained eye. But it is purposeful, calculated. When it happens, it usually happens fast and with precision. The gangs operating on the compound, the Aryan Brotherhood, the Bloods, the Crips, MS-13, the Mexican Mafia, and others, maintain order in ways that staff often can't see until the consequences are already unfolding. Despite this, officers have often described Coleman as one of the smoother-running USPs, a rare compliment in the federal system. Clean facilities, structured routines, and consistent programming give an impression of stability. But the truth is layered. The smooth operation depends heavily on unwritten agreements, quiet understandings, and the kind of inmate self-governance common in maximum security environments. The prison gained national attention in the early 2000s when multiple high-profile inmates were housed there, including mob figures, cartel members, and notorious criminals whose reputations alone could shift the balance inside a housing unit. Coleman also became the subject of investigations and media interest due to allegations linked to other nearby facilities in the complex, claims about no-go zones, and internal violence that, true or exaggerated, only deepened the legend. The Florida Stronghold was growing into its name. And as more transfers came, as federal crime evolved in the late 90s and 2000s, as gang networks strengthened their national reach, USP Coleman I transformed from a new federal experiment into a fully matured, unpredictable ecosystem. One where every decision carries weight, every movement is calculated, and every day is a test of survival. From the outside, USP Coleman I looks like many modern federal high-security penitentiaries. Long rectangular housing blocks, perimeter towers, floodlights, razor wire, and a network of concrete pathways connecting every building with mathematical precision. But the design of Coleman I isn't just about containment, it's about control. Every inch of its layout reflects a strategy meant to manage some of the most volatile individuals in the United States. The prison is divided into multiple housing units, massive, multi-story structures built to hold hundreds of men classified at the highest security level. Each unit contains dozens of cells arranged along tiers, with metal walkways looking down on a central dayroom. From above, correctional officers observe movement, conversations, arguments, anything that might hint at rising tension. And yet, despite the visibility, inmates often say, "You can't watch everything." In a world where alliances work like shadows, open space can hide as much as it reveals. Cells in Coleman I follow the federal penitentiary standard: steel doors, narrow bunks, compact stainless steel sinks, and toilets bolted directly into concrete walls. Space is minimal, privacy non-existent. Two men can live inside a cell built for one, enduring constant proximity that can either forge unlikely friendships or ignite dangerous disputes. Many inmates describe the first night in Coleman as a psychological blow, the realization that the world outside has collapsed down to a few square feet of steel and concrete. But the architecture that defines Coleman extends well beyond the housing units. The yard, for example, is deceptively serene. Surrounded by high fencing and guarded by armed officers, it appears like any other prison recreation area. Basketball courts, pull-up bars, a track, and sparsely shaded areas where inmates sit, walk, or engage in conversations that can determine the fate of entire groups. The yard is where politics unfold. It's where inmates establish their place in a hierarchy governed not by rules, but by reputation, numbers, and history. Next to the yard sits the SHU, or Special Housing Unit, one of the most feared and controversial components of any federal prison. Inmates placed here face near total isolation, 23-hour lockdown, limited property, and sensory deprivation that can break even seasoned convicts. Coleman's SHU is frequently described as cold, silent, and endless. Some inmates cycle through for disciplinary reasons. Others are placed there for their own protection. Others because they are awaiting transfer. Either way, the SHU becomes a place where time loses its structure. Days blur into nights, and weeks stretch into months with an oppressive monotony. But perhaps the most critical, and most overlooked, element of Coleman's architecture is the movement system. Every corridor, every doorway, every timing of inmate transfers is orchestrated to minimize risk. The BOP calls it controlled movement. When the loudspeaker announces movement, inmates from different housing units are allowed to pass through the compound under strict observation, but only within a narrow time window. Miss that window and you're locked out until the next controlled move. This system prevents rival groups from mixing freely, but it also creates choke points where tensions can flare. Coleman's dining hall, too, follows patterns that go beyond simple meal service. Seating is unofficially segregated by politics. Different racial and gang groups occupy specific areas. It's not a rule enforced by the staff, it's a rule enforced by the inmates themselves. Violating it, even by mistake, can be deadly. Former prisoners recall stories of men sitting in the wrong place and paying the price minutes later. To survive Coleman I, one must understand the unwritten map of the compound as well as the official one. Inside the education and programming buildings, inmates attend classes, vocational training, and sometimes therapy sessions. On paper, these programs offer rehabilitation, and for many men they provide real value. But they also serve a second function. They provide predictable patterns of movement, creating moments where groups can communicate, trade, or send messages without being noticed. In a place where every scrap of information has value, programming buildings become informal meeting zones, neutral ground where deals can be brokered and disputes resolved without the eyes of the yard watching. Even the medical unit has a dual identity. While it exists to serve legitimate health needs, many inmates refer to it as an information hub, where you can overhear conversations between different groups awaiting treatment. For others, it's one of the only places where vulnerability becomes visible. In a maximum security setting, illness offers no reprieve from politics. Weakness can be observed. Lists of medications can be tracked. Everything matters. Coleman's architecture then isn't simply concrete arranged into functional forms, it's a complex ecosystem designed for containment yet shaped by the men who inhabit it. The prison controls movement, but inmates control interpretation. The structures are built for safety, but safety is always relative. Even with cameras, towers, and strict procedures, Coleman operates on a knife-edge balance between order and instinct. And as the years went on, the prison's design would become the stage for some of the most significant events in federal prison history, incidents that exposed the limits of control, the power of inmate hierarchies, and the reality that even the strongest fortress can never fully predict the human element within its walls. To understand USP Coleman I, you must understand its true rulers, not the administration, not the officers in the towers, but the invisible political system created by the inmates themselves. Inside a maximum security penitentiary, formal authority is only part of the equation. The Bureau of Prisons can enforce structure, but it cannot erase decades of alliances, wars, betrayals, and codes that shape every interaction behind the wire. Coleman I, like every high-security federal institution, operates under a system inmates call car politics. A car is a group based on race, geography, or gang affiliation. It's a form of government, an alliance, and a defense network all at once. Every man belongs to a car, even if he claims he doesn't. Independence is a myth in a place where numbers mean safety. Whether you're from California, Texas, New York, or the Midwest, your region defines your expectations. Whether you're affiliated or not, your racial group dictates your obligations. It is a structure older than the prison itself. At Coleman I, some of the most influential groups historically include the Aryan Brotherhood, Bloods, Crips, MS-13, Mexican Mafia, Latin Kings, Serenos, and powerful independent groups such as the DC CAR, men from the nation's capital who have had a strong presence in the federal system for decades. These groups don't simply coexist. They negotiate, regulate, punish, and maintain a fragile balance that keeps the yard from collapsing into chaos. The Aryan Brotherhood, for example, has long held a reputation across the federal system for organization, violence, and structure. Although their numbers are smaller than some other groups, their influence comes from a strict hierarchy and willingness to act decisively when needed. Former inmates describe their governance as cold and calculated, an internal court system where debts must be paid and violations addressed swiftly. On the other side of the racial divide, various black gangs operate with their own hierarchies and rules. The Bloods and Crips, though united only in name, function through subsets tied to specific neighborhoods. One faction's actions can ripple across the entire yard. Disputes that begin hundreds of miles away, beef between two neighborhoods in Los Angeles or New Jersey, can suddenly surface inside Coleman, requiring leaders to step in before a personal conflict becomes a full-scale racial issue. In prison, one stabbing rarely stays personal. Everything is political. For the Hispanic population, the structure is equally complex. Groups like the Serenos and the Mexican Mafia maintain deep ties stretching from Southern California to federal prisons nationwide. MS-13, with its international reach, brings its own code, often operating with a tight, militaristic style. The Latin Kings, historically powerful in the Midwest and East Coast, add another layer of influence. These groups maintain their own courts, leadership hierarchies, and systems of discipline that function parallel to the BOP's official rules. But the truth often missed in mainstream coverage is this: most violence inside federal prisons is not random. It's regulated. It's debated. It's often approved, or denied, by higher-ranking inmates working behind the scenes. Even those considered shot callers don't have absolute power. Every major decision is influenced by long-standing treaties between groups, unspoken agreements that keep the yard stable. Coleman I's reputation as a clean but dangerous USP stems from this enforced order. When rules are respected, the yard runs smoothly. When rules are violated, consequences are inevitable. Something as small as disrespecting a table in the chow hall, as minor as using another group's phone time, or as serious as failing to pay a gambling debt can trigger meetings between cars. Representatives from several groups may gather in corners of the yard or the rec building, talking quietly, weighing the issue, deciding whether blood must be drawn or whether a lesser punishment will suffice. Yet control is not absolute. Some of Coleman's most significant incidents have erupted when someone acted impulsively, when a young inmate refused to follow protocol, or when a long-standing feud from another prison followed two men through the transfer system. Violence can sweep across a housing unit in seconds. One wrong decision can bring months of tension to the surface. Another misunderstood truth is that many of these groups enforce rules meant to reduce unnecessary violence. Counterintuitive as it may seem, their internal codes can prevent chaos rather than create it. Stabbings are not casual, they are strategic. Assaults are not random, they're messages. And behind every message is a chain of command. The result is a prison where administration and inmate governments exist simultaneously. Officers may run official operations, count times, work assignments, movement schedules, but the cars run the culture. They determine who can walk the yard safely, who can live in which unit, who must check into protective custody, and who must leave the compound one way or another. USP Coleman I's invisible government stays out of public view, but it dictates daily life more powerfully than any policy written in Washington, D.C. It is the silent engine of survival, discipline, and conflict. And as the population grew through the late 90s and early 2000s, these groups would find themselves tested by new arrivals, younger convicts, and high-profile inmates whose names alone could disrupt the balance inside the Florida Stronghold. One of the defining characteristics of USP Coleman I is the caliber and notoriety of some of the inmates who have passed through its gates. Not every high-security prison houses individuals whose names echo across news headlines, federal indictments, and criminal history books. But Coleman I has held its share of figures whose reputations alone could shift the balance of a housing unit. High-profile inmates do not enter a USP quietly. Their presence sends ripples across the yard before they ever step foot into general population. Rumors start immediately. Who came in? Who do they run with? What's their charge? These questions aren't curiosity, they're survival metrics. A single notorious inmate can force political realignments, spark tensions between gangs, or demand adjustments to long-standing agreements simply because of who they are. One of the most widely discussed former inmates connected to Coleman was James Whitey Bulger, the infamous Boston mob boss and longtime FBI informant. Although Bulger was not housed in Coleman I at the time of his death and spent the majority of his federal sentence in other institutions, documents show he was assigned to the Coleman complex earlier in his incarceration. Even that temporary placement triggered intense debate behind the wire. Bulger's informant status put him at the bottom of the prison respect hierarchy, a no-go individual in most high-security yards. If he had ever entered general population at Coleman I, the consequences would have been immediate and severe. His presence created a security dilemma for staff and a political dilemma for inmates, proving how the mere transfer of a high-profile figure can disrupt the environment. Another figure whose transfer to the Coleman complex drew attention was Luis Felipe, also known as King Blood, founder of the New York Latin Kings. Felipe's federal convictions and history of orchestrating violent acts from inside prison made him one of the most tightly restricted inmates in the entire Bureau of Prisons. While Felipe was ultimately housed in the ADX Florence Control Unit for most of his life sentence, his earlier federal journey included stops within the wider system before his permanent placement. Even short-term placements of gang founders or leaders create immediate reactions in any USP, Coleman included. They alter the political chemistry of entire units. Inside Coleman I, notorious figures are evaluated not only by fame but by what their notoriety represents. Some inmates are feared because of gang influence, others because of crimes that carry symbolic weight, others because of cooperation with law enforcement, an unforgivable offense in the inmate code. These distinctions determine their fate from the moment they arrive. For example, inmates involved in large-scale drug conspiracies, cartel operations, or organized crime often gain a form of respect rooted in reputation. Their stories, whether embellished or not, circulate through the yard long before they do. Their presence may strengthen their car or raise its status among others. Many of them have experience navigating complex power structures, which can make them valuable assets to existing groups. But inmates labeled as informants, sex offenders, or individuals who violated group codes face an entirely different reality. Coleman, like all USPs, enforces a harsh truth: not every inmate can walk the yard. High-profile informants, especially, cannot survive long in general population. Their placement often requires immediate administrative attention, separation, or transfer. Then there are inmates whose notoriety stems from sheer violence. Men involved in high-profile murders, dramatic criminal incidents, or violent crimes committed inside other prisons. These individuals carry a different type of weight. Their arrival signals that they have already been through the harshest parts of the system. Many times, they bring with them existing rivalries that must be addressed to prevent violence inside Coleman. One of the more interesting dynamics involves inmates whose reputations come from non-violent but sensational cases, high-level fraudsters, political criminals, or financial figures who end up in maximum security not because of violence, but because of classification factors like length of sentence, escape risk, or notoriety. These men often enter a world that shares nothing with the corporate or political environments they once commanded. Their adjustment is often harsh. They must quickly learn the unwritten rules of the yard, the codes of respect, and the importance of alignment. Even without gang ties, they must be vouched for by someone, somewhere. In this environment, notoriety can be either shield or target. A man known nationwide may earn instant attention, but attention is not always safety. In many cases, the more famous an inmate is, the more their past is scrutinized. Paperwork, court documents, indictments, trial transcripts, becomes a form of currency. Inmates demand transparency. Anyone hiding paperwork immediately raises suspicion. Officers at Coleman have often noted that high-profile inmates require more monitoring, not because they are inherently more dangerous, but because any conflict involving them becomes exponentially more disruptive. A fight between two unknown inmates is a routine event. A fight involving a nationally infamous figure becomes a national headline. But perhaps the most important truth is this: notoriety on the outside does not equal power on the inside. Inside Coleman I, power comes from numbers, alliances, and respect, not fame. Even the most infamous individuals must navigate the same politics as everyone else. Coleman's history with high-profile inmates illustrates the unpredictable nature of life inside a maximum security penitentiary. Their presence reshapes alliances, tests the inmate code, and forces the entire compound, staff and prisoners alike, to reassess the balance of peace. Because inside the Florida Stronghold, reputation isn't just history. It's leverage. It's threat. It's opportunity. And sometimes it's a spark in a room full of powder. To the outside world, federal prisons operate on strict regulations. Inmates receive meals, commissary lists are controlled, and money is tracked through official channels. But anyone who has ever served time in a high-security penitentiary knows the truth: an entirely separate economy thrives beneath the surface. At USP Coleman I, this underground system is not just a convenience. It's survival, influence, leverage, and power rolled into one. The foundation of Coleman's underground economy begins with something deceptively simple: commissary. Though the items seem ordinary, ramen soups, mackerel packets, hygiene products, instant coffee, writing supplies, they form the backbone of a marketplace that replaces traditional currency. Since physical money is prohibited inside prison, commissary goods become a fluid, flexible exchange system. A single bag of sealed mackerel, for example, becomes a standard unit of trade across much of the federal system. Inside Coleman, a man's financial strength is often measured by how many macs he can command. But commissary is only the beginning. In a place where demand always exceeds supply, hustles develop to fill every possible void. Some inmates specialize in laundry services, ironing clothes to perfection using makeshift techniques that produce crisp creases rivaling professional cleaners. Others cut hair with incredible precision, turning a pair of clippers, or even improvised tools, into steady streams of trade income. And then there are the artists, men who paint portraits, hand-draw greeting cards, or create elaborate mural pieces in exchange for food or protection. Where things become complicated and dangerous is in the credit system. Inmates who lack commissary money can borrow from others, usually through their car or through influential individuals. But unlike the outside world, failure to repay here can trigger violent consequences. A gambling debt, even one as trivial as a few soups, can balloon into a serious offense if ignored. Cars treat unpaid debts as signs of disrespect, and disrespect is currency for violence. Every inmate understands this unwritten law: never borrow what you can't repay and never skip out on a debt. Gambling itself is a massive engine of the underground economy. Sports bets, card games, fantasy leagues, and even informal tournaments unfold in dayrooms and recreation areas. Some inmates run entire betting operations that mirror small businesses, complete with bookkeepers and runners. These gambling networks can move thousands of dollars worth of commissary goods over months. While officers occasionally attempt to crack down, the ingenuity of inmates ensures that gambling finds new forms. A single NFL season inside Coleman I can reshape alliances, enrich certain groups, and bankrupt others. Then there is the darker side of the underground economy: contraband. No maximum security prison is immune to smuggling, and Coleman I is no exception. Historically, contraband has entered through multiple channels: mail, visiting rooms, corrupt staff, or even drones in recent years. Everything from cell phones to tobacco to synthetic drugs has been intercepted at one time or another. Each item commands a price far beyond its street value. A simple flip phone can be worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars inside, depending on its size, functionality, and connection to the outside world. Contraband phones, more than anything else, have transformed power structures in federal prisons. With a phone, an inmate can conduct business, coordinate with outside associates, or strengthen his influence within a gang. Phones turn the walls of Coleman porous. They allow communication that the Bureau of Prisons struggles to control. For this reason, possession of a phone carries severe consequences, but the demand never disappears. Power is worth the risk. Food hustles are also legendary inside Coleman. Inmates find creative ways to use commissary items and limited access to microwaves to produce everything from burritos to pizzas to elaborate spread bowls shared during group events. Cooking in prison culture is an act of friendship and influence. The men who can cook well often build alliances simply through their skill, drawing respect across political lines. Meal gatherings, though informal, serve as critical spaces for building trust. But influence within the underground economy isn't always about goods, it's about access. An inmate who can secure prime work assignments, especially in food service or maintenance, gains leverage. Someone who works in the laundry can control clothing distribution. Someone in the commissary warehouse can influence availability. Someone in landscaping may access corners of the compound where communication becomes easier. These positions become bargaining chips that cars fight for behind the scenes. One of the most overlooked but powerful components of the prison economy is information. Knowledge about upcoming transfers, pending lockdowns, internal investigations, or even staff behavior has immense value. Information is traded like currency. Sometimes it is bartered between groups. Other times it is used as leverage during negotiations. The inmate who knows what's happening tomorrow has more power today. Yet the underground economy also brings instability. A sudden spike in contraband drugs can trigger overdoses, deaths, and violent enforcement actions. A gambling dispute between two men can escalate into a racial conflict if the wrong words are exchanged. A stolen commissary item can ignite tensions in a housing unit already simmering with distrust. Behind every transaction lies the risk of confrontation. The officers at Coleman know this, and many acknowledge that the underground economy, when balanced, can actually stabilize the environment. It creates an incentive system. It provides structure where official structure cannot reach. But this balance is fragile. When one group monopolizes a hustle or tensions rise between cars, the economy becomes a battlefield. Inside USP Coleman I, survival is not just about strength or numbers, it's about navigating this shadow market with intelligence and restraint. Every trade, every favor, every borrowed soup carries meaning. And in a place where reputation is everything, a man's economic footprint becomes part of his identity. Coleman's underground economy is more than a hidden system of goods. It is a mirror reflecting the true power dynamics of the prison. It shapes alliances, fuels conflicts, and reveals the constant negotiation required to live another day inside the Florida Stronghold. USP Coleman I stands as one of the most controlled environments in the federal system. Yet its story is anything but contained. Behind the razor wire and the watchtowers lies a world shaped by power, politics, and survival, where every decision carries weight and every alliance comes with a cost. For the men inside, Coleman isn't just a prison. It's a battleground of identity, a marketplace of favors, a government run on respect, reputation, and fear. Some walk out changed forever. Some never walk out at all. But one truth remains: the Florida Stronghold continues to evolve, its stories buried in silence until someone is willing to pull them into the light. And if you've made it this far, you're one of the few who truly understand just how complex, dangerous, and human this world really is. So before you go, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive into America's most hidden places. The next story is already waiting behind another set of steel doors. Thank you for watching. Stay curious, stay aware. And remember, the most secure walls in America don't just keep people in, they keep stories locked away. Until next time.